Good afternoon. This webinar is based on a Wallace Foundation publication called The School Principal is Leader, Guiding Schools to Better Teaching and Learning. It was published in 2013 as a compendium document to over 70 published reports by the Wallace Foundation based on research and annotated research that has been done through Wallace Foundation work on leadership. The Wallace Foundation is an incredible organization that has supported school growth and student achievement throughout our country in terms of providing support for leaders and helping to understand how leaders work best in their craft. In this publication, The School Principal is Leader, 5 key practices were identified. The first practice is around shaping a vision. The second practice, creating a culture hospitable to education. The third practice around cultivating leadership. The fourth practice around improving instruction. And the fifth and final key practice, managing people, data, and processes to foster school improvement. NAESP has developed 5 webinars, one on each one of these key practices. And today is the webinar that will focus on managing people, data, and processes. When the Wallace Foundation began their work on school leadership, they went to a number of universities to help them look at the research. In the great scheme of things, noted one research report, schools may be relatively small organizations, but their leadership challenges are far from small or simple. To get the job done, effective leaders need to make good use of resources at hand. In other words, they have to be good managers. When it comes to data, effective principals try to draw the most from statistics and evidence, having learned to ask useful questions of the information, to display it in ways that can tell compelling stories, and to use it to promote collaborative inquiry among teachers. Principals view data as a means not only to pinpoint problems, but to understand their nature and causes. As you will see by our 2 experts today, this webinar focuses on data and how to use data in multiple ways to improve student achievement and school growth. Our experts today are Patricia Drobny and Susan Lawyer-Willis. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on each of these experts. Patty Drobny has been the principal of Soos Creek Elementary School for 9 years in Kent, Washington. She served as an assistant principal prior to her current position. Patty did her undergraduate work at the University of Washington. And Patty is an expert in building relationships with stakeholders and setting a culture in which everyone works to their strengths and capacity levels. She relies on a data-rich environment and leads her school to increase student achievement with many changes in demographics in her community. As you will see through Patty's presentation, she has brought her school a long ways in terms of creating a great culture and developing student achievement. Susan Lawyer-Willis has founded her own organization called Transformed Ed Leadership. She served as a high school and middle school principal and brings a great perspective through the lens of a secondary leader. She has also served as a director of testing in Virginia and has won many awards and recognitions for her work. She was awarded the National Governor's Award through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and she is also listed in the Who's Who among American colleges and universities. She works as an adjunct professor in the Department of Ed at Hollins University in Virginia, and was also a fellow at the Soos Academy, which is a certifying agency for superintendents, in 2011. Both Patty and Susan are NAESP nationally certified principal mentors, and both are currently mentoring new leaders to our profession. At this time, I would like to turn over the webinar to our first featured speaker, Susan Lawyer Willis.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to speak with you about managing people, data, and processes. As the Wallace report states quite clearly, that the principal is the primary empirical link between school leadership and improved student achievement. So as a 21st century educational leader, you have to have unwavering courage to lead for the success of students and not always the comfort of adults. You have to keep the end in mind. Next slide, please. Next slide. So as we're working through whether you are a new principal, whether your superintendent or your district leaders have confidence in you to turn around and transform an underperforming school, or whether you want to take the school that you're currently in and have been in for a long time to the next level, you must analyze the data. And as Carol stated in the Wallace report, it says the principal must understand the nature and the causes of the data. So we work collaboratively, yes, but it's very important that we look at the data and talk about and think about what is causing the data to either be exactly where we want it to be, to take us to the next level, or what causes some of the data to speak clearly about our students and some of the challenges we may have. For example, we should not only look at student achievement data, but maybe you need to look at the number of discipline incidences occurring in your school and where they are occurring. How about teacher attendance, school climate, parent surveys? In fact, looking at the number of minority students enrolled in some of your advanced or dual enrollment courses can be very, very important as you're leading all of your students in closing any gaps in education. Next slide. So the first thing we'd like to do as a leader is forming our measurable school goals based on the data analysis. So the data you look at is very important, for example, and it has to be measurable. So increasing student achievement in mathematics by 20% as measured by end of grade or end of course state assessments. That could be one example after you look at student achievement data. An example of discipline, setting goals around your discipline data, decreasing the number of discipline occurrences in the cafeteria by 50%. Next slide. Another example, increasing the number of minority students prepared for, enrolled in, and supported in advanced level mathematics courses by 50%, again, using that data and making it measurable in 2 years. So once you set your goals and you have to form an action plan. So I will use the increasing student achievement in mathematics for minority students as our map. Next. So as you're routing, you're mapping the goal. So we are on a journey. You are, of course, the pilot on your plane. You are the driver of the bus. You have to remember, how are we going to get to the end? We've set our goals. Now, what's our action plan for each goal? Identify the students. So remember, we're increasing the number of minority students prepared for, enrolled, and supported in advanced level mathematics classes. It could also be in science if you have a STEM focus. You need to identify the students starting early on. Communicate the goal with the students you've identified. Let them know that they are part of the school goal. Empower them. Assign mentors to your students. Incorporate enrichment activities for them. Designate effective teachers. And create a culture of success and support. Next slide. Once you do that, we need to assign the seats. We have our goals. We have our plan, our action plan on how to get there. So now everything we do as leaders must focus on the goals that we've set for our school, our hiring practices, our student scheduling, school policies and procedures, strategic plans. Even our school achievement teams and committees must be aware and be formed around the goals. So remember, The Wallace report states very clearly that the principal remains the central source of leadership influence. It is the principal who sets those goals. It is not easy to manage people, data, and processes, so we do have to have everyone on board in a collaborative approach. But ultimately, the principal is the leader of the school and has the influence, the greatest influence in raising the bar and setting the goals. Next slide. So once you've established all of that, you have to share the destination. You need to communicate all the goals to the stakeholders, and you must hold everyone accountable, even the students, to your goals. One way of doing that with our teachers and our staff would be forming accountability measures during that pre-evaluation conference. When you are sitting down for that 30 to 45 minutes, which I do with my teachers, and I review the goals that we've set forth, and I ask every teacher, so if I have 7 goals, every teacher, every staff member, every assistant principal has to choose 3 to 5. In that way, everyone in the building is working towards those 7 goals that I've chosen. No one is faltering or falling away and looking at their own goals. They are focusing on the goals of our school. I also add personal goals, so the teachers will choose their 3 to 5 of mine, but they also choose 2 personal goals as well. Another example of this strategy, the teacher has got to, once they've chosen the goals, they have got to say and let us know what is observable and the measurable strategies that they will use in the classroom to reach the goal. One example, the teacher will utilize and analyze formative and summative assessments weekly as a tool to increase student achievement in mathematics. Based on this analysis, the teacher will reteach and remediate objectives not mastered. That is an example of one measurable or achievable strategy towards the goal of increasing student achievement in math. Next slide. So another example, the teacher will increase academic rigor by incorporating Bloom's revised questioning strategies during instructional delivery, homework, and teacher-created assessments. Next slide. It is very important as we set the goals that the teachers realize that we are going to monitor those goals. Teachers, staff members, and assistant principals, and even students will be aware of what the goals are, so they should tell that in my math class, these are different things that I observe. And when you go as the leader of your school and you make time for regularly scheduled walkthroughs and classroom observations, you have to provide immediate feedback, and you have to gather data so that you know and your staff members know that we are working towards the goals. Next slide. So some look-fors when you're in those classes. Is there evidence that Ms. Jones is implementing the strategies she discussed with me in her pre-evaluation conference? Is it observable? Do I see it clearly? Is it measurable? Next slide. So around those goals, we have to always, as leaders, provide the tools we need to make those tune-ups and oil changes as needed. We have to schedule purposeful and meaningful staff development based on school goals. We have to provide mentors and coaches to our teachers and our administrators, like the NAESP National Mentor Program. We have to make sure everyone develops to their full potential, and that anything we ask them to do, we do support them in their role. It's important to purchase resources and technology to support the goals that we're implementing. And all of our school expenditures should be aligned with the school's goals and objectives. Even your bookkeeper or your secretary must be aware that this purchase that I am approving, or this expenditure, doesn't align with the goals of our school. Next. One example I mentioned was using that curriculum and research and making sure that you are, since you are the sphere of influence in your building, that you are always developing and learning and finding the tools needed to implement the strategies in the curriculum to get to the end in mind. So, for example, we talked about the Bloom's Revised. I would host training and staff development around that, making sure the teachers understand that the original terms were more stagnant, like analyst and application and comprehension and knowledge, whereas the new terms are more action-focused. The students are going to apply and they're going to evaluating and creating. So we want to make sure we see that going on in the classrooms. We want to make sure that we understand the change of terms and what that means when we go through and do our look-fors. Make sure, as I mentioned before, that you have the courage to change, eliminate, or extinguish practices that are not aligned with your school goals. And always celebrate. Even the checkpoints along the way. You may have quarterly checkpoints. Celebrate with everyone. Communicate and celebrate the changes and actually the growth that you will see and observe as you go through and you're on your road to success. So now we've reached our final destination. It's the end of the year. The students have taken their overall assessments. We've looked at that discipline data. We have many more minority students and being successful in our courses. So we need to share those outcomes, make sure they are numeric, let the teachers know we've increased this by 50% and what that looks like. You need to make sure you evaluate, adjust for next year, and celebrate. Create the new roadmap for your next year. Bon voyage.
Great, Susan. Thank you. We did get a couple questions for you as you were doing your presentation. I'd like to pause for a minute and ask you to respond to a couple of the questions that we do have.
Yes, thank you.
I would also like to encourage our participants to continue to ask questions in the question box. One question that came through is, do teachers or teams of teachers help each other to achieve their goals?
Absolutely, that is so important. As I mentioned before, the principal is the central source of leadership influence, but we know that it is our teachers who must implement our vision and our goals. So it's important, as I mentioned before, to have coaches and partners and make sure our veteran teachers are helping and mentoring our new teachers as they go through this process. Also, it's important to have the staff development teachers in the building that we know do well and may be the best at the Bloom's Revised and the best at implementing instructional practices in mathematics to share that with their staff or share that with their colleagues. So yes, even in setting the goals can be very important to involve your teachers. Yes.
Great, thank you. How do you, another question was around professional development. How do you incorporate individual professional development when there is very few funds to support that?
I gave a perfect example. The resources in our schools are tremendous, and principals often partner with other schools or universities, so you can definitely work with your community and your school community, your community outside of school to provide resources that aren't very expensive. Use webinars, like this one today is a free webinar as part of our staff development. Offer that on staff development days or early dismissal days. Offer staff development in the school that is free for your teachers, and you can also give them some credits for participating.
Great, thank you so much. I know we will have more questions for you at the end of the webinar, so thank you, Susan.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
I love your quote. It really looks and is a mirror of what your vision and belief systems that you just shared with us, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to move to our next expert presenter this afternoon, Patricia Drobny from Kent Public Schools in Soos Creek Elementary School, Kent, Washington.
Hi, everybody. I have to say I'm really glad to be here, and I'm more glad to be here with what just happened. As the other presenters know, our internet is down at work, so I ran home, not literally ran home. I got in my car and drove home. I fortunately live pretty close, and was able to get on a home computer and make this work, but I got to tell you, my heart was pumping like crazy. In fact, can you have the next slide, please? I have to say the last time my heart was pumping this much was about 2 Sundays ago when the Seattle Seahawks became world champions by beating the Denver Broncos. What was that score, like 43-8, I believe? So nice to have it going. That was a lot more fun than today, but it does speak to the fact that I do think a key part of managing is to remember to manage ourselves in our lives. And as you can see, I have my bio here, I've been married 31 years. I have a couple kids. They're both adult children now. I personally play a lot of soccer. I'm a huge sports fan. And I make sure that I stay on soccer teams because what it does is it grounds me. And I think that we have to remember that as leaders of a building, that if we get too wrapped up in the building and in the stress that results as just in our everyday lives of being a principal, we're not going to help anyone. So there's times when I'm like, oh my gosh, I need a game, and I go out and I play soccer, and life is good. Next. I put information about my school because of the fact that I thought this is really key. It's a very unique school in that I'm not really all that large. 397 students in Kent even we're the third smallest. There's 40 schools, and we're the third smallest. But my demographics are such that it has impacted the decisions we make. It impacts how we spend our resources. And it really had an impact not just on the staff but on all of the stakeholders. We are 21% free and reduced. We're English language. We're 51% free and reduced. And when I first became principal at Soos Creek, we were a middle-class school. So there's been a huge shift in a very short order. And then we're 22% special ed. We have a special ed preschool that is a magnet preschool, and then as of last year ended up having a self-contained support center sent to our school, and we've always had integrated program. So the changes were very rapid, and my staff, because of the fact that the teachers who are at my school and the paraeducators have been there a very long time, we had to make a shift in our thought processes and how we served kids. Next. When I was asked to do this, I started just brainstorming what are the things that I see are successful in managing people and resources and looking at the data. And my list was way longer than this, but in a nutshell, it was still these things that I thought if I did not spend time and attention on any one of the items on this list, then it could in fact be a critical error in the building. And who pays besides us? I mean, it's really about student success, and any one of these things could lead to or detract from student success. Next. So when I was thinking about organization, my organization actually starts a year ahead, and that starts with a schedule. We have our master schedule that we do that is about the interventions and about when kids go, and even teacher planning and all of that. But even beyond that, I have a professional development schedule that goes out in August to all of my staff so they can see what we have planned, and like Susan was talking about, that alignment piece is so critical. So I have to make sure, I have so little time, and I have to make sure the PD that we are doing fits to what it is that are our building goals, and our goals are a little different. I'll get to that in a minute. But also, we're doing our year at a glance already. Now we're starting, our team leaders are starting by looking at the 14-15 years. So the teachers are expected to be very proactive and look at where they are instructionally and where their kids are, and think about next year, where they want them then, because we have some very specific goals that are time-bound, and the proactive helps us stay on task with that. We believe that that organization piece for teachers and for even what I send out, the agendas have to be clear, and teachers have to know, and even some of my paraeducators will come to things when they see the agenda and see that that really has an impact on what they are doing, then they'll come to some meetings and claim effective ed for that. And then I've started this year. I'm really excited to see what the staff feels about this, but we started interactive staff journals. So I have some very key things. Bloom's taxonomy that Susan mentioned earlier is one of the things in there. But I also leave places in those journals for teachers to reflect on what they've done. And I'm just, like I said, I don't have any data to support how that is. I'm curious to see what the staff says at the end of the year about that. Next, please. We revisited our vision this year, and it's really not a bad thing to do every year, obviously, but this year I felt it was more important than ever because of, like I said, the shifts in our demographics. So we have more students in poverty, we have more students who are special ed, and we really want to honor, we want to get our students who are in the self-contained special ed program out of that, back into gen ed. But we need the data to support, and we need to have our instructional practices in a position that it does support those kids when they are given at least a lesser restrictive environment. So we had to go back and really make sure that when we talked about our beliefs and our ideal school, that when we said all means all, we really meant every one of our kids, that it's up to us to deliver instruction that is accessible to all of our kids regardless of their IQ, regardless of disability, or even really if they're above and beyond. Susan mentioned celebrating. We do too. I'm telling you, sometimes when your days are tough, for me personally, if I walk across a parking lot and I don't trip, I'm going to celebrate that, because it's really those celebrations that can help us get back in the door, because it's a tough job. We talked about moving at our school. We talked about moving from buy-in to commitment. It was one thing to get a consensus on a decision and get everybody to buy into that, but I asked them to really think deeper in terms of what they're going to do to make that successful, because what I really wanted is a commitment to looking at instructional practice, looking internally and seeing what we're doing and how does that impact our students. And commitment just, to me, really grounded people in the work more than just saying we want you to buy into this. And then for culture, norms are kind of like a safety net is how I like to think of them. We set those up building-wise, and also the team teachers set those up. One of the questions someone asked earlier spoke to, do the teachers work together to meet those goals? And in my school, absolutely. We'll talk in a minute about professional learning communities. But even when my teachers are setting goals that are data-based, and 3 of those goals are on student growth and evidence of student growth, when they do that, they work collaboratively with other people with common interest. So there's a lot of that. So the norms increase that trust, it increases the accountability, and it's just proactive, so no one has to call someone on an expectation or a behavior. It's already set. Next. Our school improvement plan is started in the spring based on the data that we have as the current year. It gets revised in the summer before school starts with the state data that we get, which is, you know, it gives us trend data, but it's really, I think, not as critical as the data that the teachers get on the benchmark assessments that we give and classroom-based assessments. So the difference I've seen this year in our, oh, I'm sorry, if you could go back to that, in our school improvement plan is it is more current and public and more communicated and more monitored than it's ever been. And so really more of our stakeholders were involved in that process. When we have our monthly school improvement team meetings, that encourages, or I'm sorry, it includes community members and parents that are representative of our demographics. We call up that plan online, and we look and we see who had tasks assigned, were they done on time, what were the results of those, and so our school improvement plan is more talked about this year than it has ever been. And again, it's all based on what do you need to do to make more students more successful every day. Next. Communication. This has been an in-your-face thing for me actually right now. We talked about the essential conversations, and I think Susan mentioned something about that. Some of those conversations are very difficult to have. One this morning that I had with a couple of teachers who don't have the best culture in their classroom, and some of the decisions they're making right now are making that culture even more difficult and really getting in the way of the instruction and the student success. But you got to be able to have them, and a huge part of that is listening. And for us right now, it's conference week, and so it gives us an excellent opportunity to meet with stakeholders. I think it is incredibly important to be a visible principal and be an open principal and honor those. And I was actually in my office with an unplanned meeting last night with parents until about, well, almost 9 o'clock. So, you know, fortunately, we're not doing that every day, but they needed to be heard, and they really made some excellent points that are going to lead to some improvements in our building. And I always think it's important to be human and to own up to our mistakes and let people feel comfortable coming to us. I would imagine as a new teacher it would be very difficult to go to a principal. I try to make that easier by admitting mine, and I find that what that does is it helps my teachers be more willing to take risk in their instructional practice because they know that we are human. The fact is it's a people business, and we've got to remember that. Next. So the data, boy, you just cannot do this job without data, and the fact is it has to be easily accessible. So whatever system works in your own buildings, we have shared drive that the data gets updated. Progress monitoring data every 2 to 3 weeks, and so any teacher at any time can go to that drive and see not just how their students are doing, but how students, some of them we have a huge level of ownership of all of the students, so some teachers will check on kids that they've had and make sure to go out of their way to see how they're doing. That's got to be easily accessible. It's got to be timely. We intentionally plan our assessments to a time when we can do some shared scoring and some shared data analysis. Again, going back to the question of do the teachers work together to meet goals. If you're not doing common assessments and you're not having discussions about that, then you're not going to have, I would think, not as nearly as much student growth and really not as much of a change in your instructional practice. And with the Common Core changes, we've got to be doing some things differently in our instructional practice. It has to be meaningful and purposeful. We did in the fall have an assessment in our district that really was not aligned as well as it should have been, and scores in our building were about 12%, which was commensurate with what the district was doing, and we did not spend a lot of time on that. It just wasn't that data didn't give us information that would change our practice. We knew that we still had a lot of things to do. So if you know you hear about data rich, information poor, keep it meaningful or move on. It has to be discussed. We have professional learning communities that will design common lessons. The teachers are doing dry runs where they actually will teach the lesson in front of their peers. Then they teach it. They come back with the results of their lesson. They share that data. They talk about it. They say, what do we need to do differently? We have our intervention teams that meet every week that are looking at the student data and adjusting the tiered intervention groups that we use, that we form as a result of those data. Our district support team comes in our building twice a year, looks at the data, and I've found actually has been pretty supportive of when I say there's something that we need that is aligned with professional development. They will give us those resources, and it might be in the form of a book, or it could be in the form of a building or a district expert coming in and doing some professional development. But the other key thing, it's got to be multiple types and multiple sources. If you're just relying on that state exam, even though that's what goes public and that's what gets the attention, you're missing out on what really is going to impact day-to-day instructional changes. Next. I spoke about professional learning communities, and I wanted to get back to that because last year we, at our school, had adopted a new program called Learning Teams, and because of some union decisions and things, we're a pretty strong union district in Kent, there was a shift in that, and now Kent is district-wide a professional learning communities-based district. But the thing that has not left, regardless of what you want to call it, the thing that is consistent is that in those team community meetings, teachers are discussing instruction. They're talking about student learning. They're identifying staff learning needs. They're talking about continuous improvement, and that's both for the staff and for the student, and making opportunities for that data-based instruction. The most powerful thing I have seen as a result of that is that my teachers have moved beyond just saying, I want to do a gradual release of instruction. We're going to teach it, we're going to model it, we're going to have the students do it together, and then they're going to do it individually. We have, our teachers start, when they start planning a lesson together, they start with brainstorming. Should we do Socratic seminar? Should we have a problem-based group work activity? Should We present examples and non-examples and have the kids identify what they think that the subject is about. It's just really been phenomenal to see a change in the instructional practice and really getting out there and trying some new things. Next. Our instruction is always aligned to standards. It's one of the expectations that when I go into a room, I can see what the objective is. I can see how it's aligned to the standard, and I can see even more than that, the success criteria. And it's not just about what I see, it's about what students know they're expected to do. And with that PLC base, with the professional learning communities, you're asking, what do you want the students to learn? How are you going to teach it? What if they don't learn it? And what if they already know it? And that's what those students need to know. They need to know, how are they going to prove to the teacher they understood that lesson? And actually, one other thing about that I would go back to is that support and pressure, and that's key, and that's really, I think, a fine line for a principal to walk, and especially if you're in a very strong union building, is you want to support the teachers in their instructional practice, and you're doing the walkthroughs, and, you know, 'cause we have our formal observations. I sit down and I do the goals, and I find out from the teacher what they're going to do and what they're going to see. I observe, I see that I make a list of things I've noticed. I make a list of things I'm wondering. And then I have a dialogue, because really I think that instructional practice improves with the conversation you're having. But sometimes that support has to take the form of pressure. And that doesn't mean that I'm trying to write them up or get them in trouble. It means I'm trying to pressure them into pushing themselves into trying some other instructional strategy and learning a little more about the pedagogy behind teaching. Next. Protocols, along with those norms, it really is, in a sense, a safety net, but more than anything, it increases that productivity. And we use protocols for different types of protocols to get more impact and more teacher feedback, but also the protocols I model very often for my teachers, they can take back into the classroom and use. The bottom line about those is it leads to a final product. And so the teachers will get it. They know that they only have, let's say, 55, 60 minutes to do something with their team. And if that protocol includes a timeline for how long each step is going to take, it's going to keep them on task. They're going to be able to identify the next steps. It increases that accountability, so every single person in the building has some role when they're meeting, and they know what that role is because it's already on the paper, or they assign it collaboratively themselves. And it ensures that all of the people have a voice. Like when you're doing a fishbowl, a tap out, for example, protocol, where you have everybody meeting talking about a discussion, and then you have someone who has something to say, they have to tap someone else. So it encourages everybody to have a say, and it really limits that airtime too if you have someone that does all the talking. Next. Again, I want to thank you. I'm glad I was able to get on, and thank you to the NAESP tech person who was able to do whatever magic you worked, so I appreciate that.
Patty, thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. I think your comment early in your presentation was education is a people business. And certainly with the interactive and collaborative ways that you have led your staff, it certainly represents that statement that education is a people business, and you certainly exemplify that in your school. We did have a couple questions for you, Patty, that before I open up questions to both of you that directly are related to your comments. You mentioned early in your comments about interactive staff journals. So the question is, can you talk a little bit more about interactive staff journals? How did you introduce them to the staff and implement them to give them validation and efficacy?
Yeah, and like I said before, I don't have any data to show yet if there's any validation or efficacy with that, but what I did is, this was an idea I stole from another principal in Kent, And so what I did is I thought, what are the key things that I want my staff to have at their fingertips? So for example, the professional development calendar. So there were some logistical things that were unique to Soos Creek. There was a glossary. Some of that glossary included some things that were unique to my school as well. And then resources as far as like Bloom's taxonomy and Common Core information that they should need, and our behavior plan, our school-wide system. So I thought these are the things that they can put in their grade book, or they can put in a file, or they can save to their desktop or wherever they do, but if I have it close, then they're more apt to use it. So that was part of the reasoning behind that. But now when we do a protocol, for example, I described the little fishbowl kind of protocol, then they can tape that in, and then at the end of that they can use a reflection. So and I don't check those. It's really, I want those to be personal. I want, and then maybe they say, you know what, Patty, I think you finally lost it. I would never know that. But it really is just to say, I honor your time. I consider what we did valid, but I want you to reflect on it. And part of that reflection might be, how are you going to take that new learning into the classroom? And if they write it, I think they're more apt to remember that and use it again. Like I said, I haven't asked them, what do you guys think? We'll see at the end of the year.
Great. Taking that one step further, do you think that process would work with a staff interactive journal that is more electronic, like a blog or something where people can continuously add?
You know, I absolutely do think that. I haven't done that. I'm not a huge tech person, which is funny because I think, you know, it's such a reality of our job, but I do have a principal friend who uses Notebook quite a bit, and that is one thing that his staff does, is anyone can put something on there and they can respond to it, and it really increases their communication, keeps everybody in the loop.
Great, thank you. One other question specifically directed for you is, you mentioned support and pressure and the fine line that principals walk between supporting their staff and the pressure that is absolutely necessary for, at times, releasing staff members that just don't fit. So when you talk about the support and pressure in terms of your instruction, and you said that your learning teams really are really focused on instruction in their meetings, how can you change that conversation when you are the principal of a new principal to a school that doesn't have a great culture about teams and staff members working together? So you know that you have to apply the pressure, but you have to get them to the point where they trust each other. So again, walking that fine line, what would be your recommendation to a new or newly assigned principal having issues about changing the conversation about instruction?
Yeah, that's actually a tough one, and I would say the first step is starting with listening. But if you're, regardless of where you work and what you call it, you've got to have your teams working together. They should be doing some common, not lesson plan, I mean, not like just planning like who's going to make copies of things, but really looking at the standards and then setting a goal of what it is that you've identified that is a definite student need at your grade level. And then once and that can be tough even to agree on what that goal is. It should be data-based, so that should give you some guidelines in that. But even what's tougher about that, I find, is to really come up with common language and a common understanding of what that means. Even when if you say, I'm going to teach main idea, clearly define what do you mean by main idea at that grade level. So I would recommend getting supports like that, getting structures in like that where the team is going to be working toward a common goal. And then where the principal comes in with support and pressure is to really attend those meetings, but not not interject yourself too much, because you really want the teachers to be the one doing the work and coming up with the ideas. But if they start to stray, and this is where it could be the pressure part, if the team starts to stray from that objective, that's a good time for the principal to just ask questions and not necessarily give advice, because if trust is an issue, they're not going to want to hear that anyway. But just to say, how does this address the goal that you've identified? Or can you help me understand? And I would do it in a questioning. And what I've found when I've had to do that is the teams look back at that goal and then they realize, whoops, we've strayed. Either we need to revise our goal because our data is showing that needs to be done, or we need to just redirect our conversation back to that.
Great. Thank you so much for that, that helpful insight and clarification. We do have some other questions that we're just going to hold off until for a couple more minutes. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Patty, for your piece of this, and both Susan and Patty will be here to answer more questions. So for the attendees, please feel free to type in more questions, and we will come back to those in a couple minutes. I would like now to align the 5th key practice by the Wallace Foundation, which was managing people, data, and processes, to the leading learning community standards for what principals should know and be able to do, the landmark NAESP publication, which is really a publication that is used by principals to assess their own growth. Standard 5 out of the 6 standards outlined in this publication is manage data and knowledge to inform decisions and measure progress of student, adult, and school performance. And it was particularly this Standard 5 that the individuals were talking about today. Standard 5 has a number of strategies that support that, and they're listed on your screen. But they are certainly all around data, and data that leads to building capacity and comparing your institution to other schools with the same demographics. That is one of the areas that as a national organization we see that would be incredibly valuable for all of our principals and all of our school leaders to look at much more closely. Sometimes you get so focused on what is happening in your own school, your own district, your own state, or your own region that you don't see the bigger picture of what you can learn from other schools and other principals and other school leaders that are working in environments with the same demographics. So we would like to encourage you as you work on your management skills to do that. In the Leading Learning Communities publication, it is a continuum resource that principals can use to see if they're working at a level 1 through a level 5. Continuously, principals are trying to improve their own skills, whether they are new principals, whether they are mid-career principals or experienced or even retired principals or acting as mentors. That you have to look at your growth. In different years it may be different. You might be at a level 3 one year and a level 5 another year because you're focusing on a different standard. So the publication is really an opportunity for principals to self-assess, self-reflect, and really look with depth and complexity at their own practice to help their own school improve for student growth. There are a couple of resources around Standard 5 that are listed on this slide. These are excellent resources, but our publication, Leading Learning Communities, has other resources that would be incredibly valuable for you as a new or experienced principal. So now we will get to our last few questions from the audience. And these questions will go out to both you, Susan, and you, Patty. And Susan, I would ask you to answer first. This question is from one of our attendees, Karen, And she said, how does the process of setting school goals dovetail with goal setting at the Board of Education or district level? Susan, would you like to respond?
Yes. Hi, Karen. I honestly, I've been in that role of principal in the district, and you'd be very surprised that oftentimes they do line up. I think once you analyze your district goals, they are oftentimes very broad. Oftentimes they're about student achievement in certain areas, grade levels, or subjects. So that is clearly very important to align those. And what you need to do in your school is kind of look at what the district goal is, and as the administrator who's looking at the causes that lie beneath your results, you need to realize that as a district, it all rolls up. So having both of those combined works very well, because your district data is a reflection of your school. And so it shouldn't be in isolation. However, they really do tie in. And if you go back and look at your district goals, then you can even use those as a starting point of where you are at your school, and then look at other data. For example, the discipline data, look at the teacher attendance data. All of those things affect student achievement. So they really are not in isolation.
Great. And
yeah, and actually I would agree with that. I would agree with that and say that our online InduStar program that we use for setting our school improvement plans is in Washington. I don't know about other states, but in Washington, that is a required plan for focus schools, so it is very data-based about where the need is and where the deficits are. And just by nature of how you complete that, it puts it in SMART goal form. So you have to have your objectives, you have to have your data, you have to have your evidence. And then for part of that is to justify your current practice and how that's going to look when it's completed. And some of the things that we absolutely have to do when we're completing those is speak to how that addresses the district plan, and then speak to how it's going to impact our subgroups, and those, in our case, for our school, especially with special ed and ELL, because our numbers are so high in that area and we're not seeing the rate of student achievement that we want to see there. So we have to align that, and then all of those are, everything in our district has the board goals, and then I put on my documents that I send out to the teachers, I include the board goals and the district goals and my school goals on those agendas and things, so they always see that alignment.
thank you. One final question to each of you, if you could just answer briefly. How do you make public the information about school goals, and how do you involve the community in the development of your goals?
Did you want me to go first, Susan?
Sure. Pat?
Okay. Like I said, we start our school improvement plan in August, or rather in June, and then it's an ongoing thing. And on our school improvement team, we have community reps as well as parent reps from our school. So they're involved in the process of the development and also the monitoring. And then it is on our website, and it's on the district website. And then I include comments about student growth and some of the things that we're doing in my biweekly newsletters.
Okay, I'd like to add, we do a lot of the same things, but if you are a Title I school, you are required to have your parent meetings, and those are very important because part of the Title I program is to have parent meetings, parent involvement, parent committees, and they're your number one speakers to getting the word out. So yes, I have communicated with my Title I, the school improvement teams on our websites, and we also put them in the student handbooks. So usually those goals are set over the summer as we're printing our student handbooks and our student journal books, some people call them. So they are in the front of those.
Thank you so much. This is close to the conclusion of our webinar today, Taking Wallace Research to Practice. We certainly would like to thank our two expert presenters, Susan Lawyer-Willis and Patty Drobny. You brought us excellent ideas and gave incredible insights into how we manage data, processes, and people. I would like to encourage our audience to attend the NAESP National Conference, Best Practices for Better Schools, which takes place in Nashville, Tennessee in July. We will be talking more about these 5 key practices from the Wallace Foundation, as well as the NAESP standards for what principals should know and be able to do. There are a number of sessions at our convention in which you can be directly involved about using the Wallace research. So we certainly encourage everyone to attend our convention. And go to the NAESP website to get additional information. I also would like to share with everyone, off the NAESP website is a Center for New Leaders. As I had mentioned earlier, Susan and Patty are both nationally certified mentors from our NAESP National Mentor Program, in which they did a year of work with a new principal to develop their skills as mentors and coaches. You can find out more information about that as well on the NAESP website. And we also have a Center for New Leaders. And in the Center of New Leaders, there is a rubric for each of the 6 NAESP standards that is very valuable for every new and experienced principal. So I recommend that to all of our attendees today as well. The day cannot finish, and this is our final webinar of our series, without a huge thank you to Honor Fetty, who has directed all of the webinars, runs our Center for New Leaders, and also does our PD Now, which is an email that comes out around all the professional development that NAESP offers. And those are just a few of the many things that Honor does. So we would like to thank Honor tremendously for the support of principals around the country and the world. Again, thank you to Susan and Patty, and this concludes our webinar.